and got a job in Macon with voc rehab, which means he worked with disabled people to get them training and education and jobs. My mother was a public school teacher. She's still alive. She still lives in Macon, and she taught in the public school system in Bibb County for 30 years. And so from my parents, I learned about the importance of service. I learned that government can do good things in the lives of ordinary people. And from my parents, I learned that to whom much is given, much is expected in return. So, went away to college, came back to law school at the University of Georgia. I met my wife there, a fellow law student. We will have been married 40 years this September. We have 2 children, a son, Wade, who is married to a law student. This is my kid who swore he would never be a lawyer. And, he went to law school and married a classmate. And they had our first grandchild, Wade Isaac Herring, born on December the 30th. And I'll talk about him a little bit more. And I have a daughter, Kathleen, who's a second-year resident in internal medicine at Wake Forest. Susan, my wife, deserves most of the credit for our 2 children, but I'll take a little bit of the credit. I've been at Hunter McLean since 1985 here in Savannah. I had the great privilege to work with Malcolm McLean for the last 15 years of his career. For those of you who know your Savannah history, Malcolm was mayor of the city of Savannah in the early 1960s. And during the summer of 1963, Malcolm met with civil rights leaders like W.W. Law and Eugene Gadsden. And when I say met over and over again, sitting at the table, listening, learning. And under Malcolm's leadership, the city of Savannah peacefully desegregated that summer of '63 ahead of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. When Martin Luther King Jr. visited the city in January of 1964, he said that Savannah was the most integrated city south of the Mason-Dixon. When Malcolm, so we have that great history, and people like to say about Savannah doesn't ever want to change. The famous joke is when Oglethorpe left, he said, "Don't change a thing till I get back." But when you look at the history of Savannah, there are examples like Malcolm McLean and W.W. Law and Eugene Gadsden, people sitting down together for change, for the common good. And you look at historic Savannah and the women who founded historic Savannah, you look at that history. And you look at the civil rights history, actually in Savannah goes back much further than the 60s. It was a local movement. We were never really part of the national movement. Imagine that, people in Chatham County thinking they could do things on their own. But we've got that great history here in Savannah. When Malcolm ran for mayor and ran for re-election, he lost. And he never went back to politics. But I always admired his bravery and his leadership. And I wondered, when my time came, if my nation called, would I be able to have that courage to answer that call? And last January I said, yes, I've answered that call. So I've worked since I was age 14. My very first job, I dug ditches in a pecan grove. In Perry, Georgia. Turned out the pecan grove was owned by a man you might have heard of named Sam Nunn. I did not know Sam Nunn. I knew the small business owner who lived across the street from my parents, and he would see me mowing the grass in my parents' yard, and he said, "That kid works hard. I want to hire him." I worked one summer on a tobacco farm. That's one reason I'm a lawyer now. But I'm not afraid of hard work. I've worked hard all my life. So January the 6th, I'm at work, as I typically am. And I started hearing people in the hall say, "Have you heard what's going on in Washington?" And I started getting email alerts, and I pulled up the live stream on my computer. And quite frankly, it's still very difficult for me to talk about. I could not believe such a thing would happen in our nation. It was very clear to me then. It was not spontaneous. That was planned. That was orchestrated. It was intentional on January the 6th. It wasn't a coincidence it was on January 6th. That's the day the electoral vote is counted. There was a scaffold to hang Mike Pence. I mean, that wasn't some spontaneous eruption of people overcome by emotion. I left work early that day. I could not stay focused. Susan and I sat on the couch watching the television, anxiously wondering what was going to happen to our nation. There were some good things, some brave things that happened that day, and the thing that I will always remember is the young women, interns really, who had been assigned to guard and protect the box that the votes were in. They had the presence of mind to get that box secured. And I will always, I don't know their names, but I will always remember the brave example of those young women. But then as I continued to watch that night, I saw 6 members of the House delegation stand to vote to overturn the election. And Buddy Carter was on the front row. Yeah. Standing next to Marjorie Taylor Greene. I know Buddy Carter. Savannah, Georgia is the kind of place where we know who the congressman is. I couldn't believe that he did it. He knows better. Some of the people involved, I'm not sure of their presence of mind. Buddy Carter knows better, and he did it anyway. He violated his oath of office, his sacred oath of office, to protect and defend the Constitution. And I sat there that night, and I decided, this cannot stand. He must be held accountable for this. That is a fundamental violation of his job as a leader. His job is to put the Constitution first, to put the people first, to put our nation first. And he did none of those things that night. If you have not had the opportunity to watch the HBO documentary 4 Hours at the Capitol, I commend it to you. Representative Carter is prominently featured and prominently interviewed. So now months have passed. He's had time to think about what he did and to reflect on what he did. And he says in the documentary, I would do it 100 times over again. That's what he said. I got asked the other week by a reporter, are you going to try to tie Carter and Trump together? And my response to that is, I don't have to try. Carter did that to himself. He put the rope around the two of them, and then he cinched the knot. Those are the facts. So in late January, I wrote an open letter to Buddy Carter that was published in the Savannah Morning News, and I asked Buddy to apologize and to resign. Of course, he did not do that. But because of that letter, I heard from people from all over the state of Georgia. And the response was overwhelmingly positive. People I know and people I do not know, people from Augusta, people from Atlanta, Brunswick, all over. I got a phone call from a local businessman. You would know the name if I said it. And with tears in his voice, he said, all he can say to me is, thank you, thank you, thank you. And so from that letter, and my very strong feelings about what had happened about January 6th, and I knew already that Isaac was on the way. And I wondered what kind of country Isaac was going to inherit from us. I already knew that. So I decided I was going to run for Congress. So I declared last July. Turns out being a lawyer and a candidate for Congress is really hard at the same time. So I have put my law practice on hold, and I am doing this full time. This is my full time and my full energy. So our fellow countrymen on the other side of the aisle are very good about being against things, right? And I'm very much against January 6th and what that represents and what that stands for. But I am for things, too. I am for voting rights. And who would have thought, on January the 7th, One of my law partners came to my office and said, it cannot get worse than this. And I looked right at her and I said, yes, it can. It can get worse than this. That's what they said in Berlin in 1933. It can't get worse than this. You don't lose your country all at once. You lose your country a little bit at a time. And so we saw last January the General Assembly pass a bill that makes it harder for everybody to vote. Everybody. And it wasn't targeted at certain people, probably, but legislation is a sledgehammer, not a scalpel. It made it harder for everybody in this room to vote. That's not right. So I'm for voting rights protection at the federal level. Let's put some teeth back into the Voting Rights Act. Let's involve the Department of Justice. You know, there's hundreds of lawsuits now across the United States, many just here in the state of Georgia. Until a day or two ago, we weren't even sure which maps we would be using for the primary in May. Let's put the Department of Justice back in and let's put a stop to all that. That's just the practical solution, let alone the basic American right to vote. This very beautiful place that we live, the marshes, the Altamaha River Basin, the 14 barrier islands of Georgia, the Okefenokee Swamp, one of the wonders of the world. Whether you're a hunterman or a fisherman or just like the beauty of it, let's protect this place where we live. Let's admit the reality of climate change and let's get ready. Did you all hear about the report just issued that sea level is expected to rise a foot by the year 2050? Yeah. Folks, that's a mortgage. Yeah. That's a mortgage. What's that going to do to our property values? There's a lot, I want to protect the environment. There's a lot of self-interest in this. It's going to ruin the economy, ruin our property values if we don't get ready. Let's admit what's going on and let's get ready. And by the way, let's permanently shelve the idea of offshore drilling off the state of Georgia. Healthcare. The Affordable Care Act is now finally being given a chance to work. There are more choices on the exchange in Georgia, and those choices are less expensive. Over these past 2 years, Georgia is number 3 in the United States in terms of the people who have signed up to participate in the exchange. We're behind Florida and Texas. Isn't it interesting? Those are the top 3 states. But what the pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons, and one of the lessons is you better have a health insurance system that's not exclusively tied to employment. Hundreds of thousands of people lost their jobs overnight March a year ago, and thank God we had the Affordable Care. So, and then when we talk about health care, let's work on preventative medicine on the front end of people's lives. Another lesson of the pandemic is underlying conditions. And here on the coast, that's obesity, diabetes, and hypertension. And people say, well, I don't want to pay for somebody else's health care. When the lady out in rural Long County, because she hasn't had access to a doctor or couldn't afford a doctor and she has not managed her hypertension and she has a heart attack and she has to be airlifted to St. Joe's for surgery and now she's not in the workforce, guess what? All of us just paid for her health care. Yeah. Let's do that smarter on the front end. Education. We got a declining population in the United States. You talk to a lot of young people. There may be 1 or 2 here, but you talk to a lot of young people. Let me say this about age. People ask me about my age. What are you doing running for office? I said, well, look, Nancy Pelosi's 81, Joe Biden 79, Mitch McConnell 79, Donald Trump 75. It's about time young people like me But anyway, you talk to young people and they'll tell you, I'm not having kids. It's too hard. That's too hard. Mm-hmm. Folks, that's an economic problem. That's a national security problem. That's a very, if we don't invest in our families, what are we, the people, doing? Let's invest in our families, including early childhood education and child care. And then that infrastructure bill that passed, no thanks to the incumbent. He voted against it, although he's claimed credit for it since. But let's make sure that we get our fair share in the first district, and let's make sure that local businesses, including minority-owned businesses, get their fair share bidding on those jobs. And I will be an advocate for that money to get here. So that's in broad terms. I want to give an opportunity for questions too, what I'm standing for.